Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the West Virginia Watershed Network's webinar series, Nonpoint Source Program Approaches to Reducing Fecal Coliform Pollution. This is the third of 5 weekly webinars to provide tools and information, particularly for watershed organizations to help reduce fecal coliform loads in streams. My name is Jenna Dotson. I'm the staff scientist at West Virginia Rivers Coalition, and I help coordinate the Watershed Network. If you haven't heard of it before, the West Virginia Watershed Network is comprised of nonprofits, state and federal agencies who support the work of watershed organizations across the state of West Virginia. And one way in which we do that is providing training, such as this webinar series. And we're really looking forward to the third webinar of the series today. But before we get started, I'll just go over a couple housekeeping items. So as you can see, we're on Zoom webinar, so your camera is off and microphones are automatically muted. And as you also saw, we're recording this webinar and we'll post the recordings and also send the recordings and any other relevant resources out to the registrants. We actually have posted the recordings from the first 2 webinars already on the West Virginia Watershed Network page. Martin's going to put a link to that in the chat if you want to check those out. You'll scroll down under webinar recordings and then you'll find the recordings from the first 2 webinars. And then for questions today, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. And so you can open up that Q&A box and type your questions in there at any time throughout the presentations. Or if you would rather us unmute you and ask your question out loud, then you can just note that in the Q&A box too, that you would like to ask your question out loud. We have 2 speakers today, and we'll have a question and answer session after each of their presentations. So with that, I'll pass it to Martin to introduce today's speakers.
Hi, I'm Martin Christ. I work in the DEP in the Watershed Improvement Branch. I'm the Northern Basin Coordinator. Our first speaker today is Dennis Burns. Dennis is an environmental resource specialist in the DEP's Underground Injection Control Permitting Program, and he's worked for the state doing water quality projects for 23 years. His presentation is called The Science of Managing Fecal Coliform. Take it away, Dennis.
I can make this thing work. There we go. So, the initial topic for this week was about agriculture. And back in, I want to say it was 2008 when I first types of projects, everything was geared towards agriculture and projects that we were doing on farmland. And at that time, we constantly kept being asked, how did we know that we were getting the load reductions that we were claiming? And the reality is we were just doing what made sense to us, things that we thought would reduce fecal coliform, but we really didn't know. So what I started doing at that time was actually started looking into the research that had been done on fecal coliform loads associated with agriculture and agricultural practices. Fortunately, at that time, there was a USDA Agriculture Research Service laboratory in Beckley. So a lot of the most up-to-date research that we were finding at that time was actually conducted very locally. Much of it was conducted actually in the Greenbrier Valley in and around the karst region there. So we knew we had some really good data to go along with. And we started basing all of our load reductions, our calculations, our models, all the TMDL development, watershed-based plans, that is, off of that research that was being done there. So that way we knew that what we were reporting was accurate. When it comes to fecal coliform, the first thing you need to understand, and it took me a while to really wrap my head around this, that you're really not dealing with the typical pollutant. Fecal coliform is a living, breathing organism. It dies, it reproduces, it feeds, it produces waste, much like people do, or any other living organism. What I hope, if I don't teach you anything else throughout this talk, I hope that you'll walk away realizing that maybe when you're managing a stream for fecal coliform, you almost need to take a pest management type approach to it. So what is fecal coliform? Coliform, as I said, it's not your typical pollutant. It's a classification of a bacteria group, not an individual species. So, but it includes things like E. coli and Salmonella. So any bacteria that is um, or that typically lives in the gut of a warm-blooded animal uh, could be a fecal coliform. Some of the research that was done there at the lab near Beckley was on, how much or how many counts of fecal coliform are produced annually by different species. So you can see there, what humans are producing. Of course, these are in scientific notations. For the most part, poultry are the least producing of all livestock. Um, you see that range, with cattle and sheep. Why would there be such a big range of production? That really comes back to the diet that those animals are on. Cattle and sheep a lot of times are fed corn or corn silage, and when you feed corn and get that into the rumen of those animals, that actually creates a more environment, which makes a better environment for bacteria to grow and reproduce. So one thing you'll probably see throughout the stock is that as you look at other methods of feeding, you can even reduce your bacteria loads that way. Um, One of the things we did several years ago when we were looking at doing projects associated with stream restoration and erosion control was we actually pulled soil samples um, to test for fecal coliform. And what we found is that on average, a lot of this fecal coliform is running about 50 counts per gram in our soils. And what's happening there is you're getting a lot of this coliform getting tied up in that soil. And again, it's once it's in that environment, it can survive. It doesn't necessarily have to be in the gut of a warm-blooded animal just to survive. Another place bacteria can come from is geological sources. Now, whether we're actually getting fecal coliform from these sources or not, I don't know, but there's some really good research being done at the University of Tennessee looking at subsurface microbes, and that really bedrock and below. They're finding a lot of microbes in these geological reserves that many of them are even unknown species. So there's a good chance that if you're looking at a stream that has, is testing high for fecal coliform, but you don't know where it's coming from, look and see if there's a lot of bedrock on that stream bed. That bedrock weathering could be bringing in, unknown species of bacteria that could possibly be throwing a false positive for fecal coliform in your test. So what I'm going to do throughout this talk is I'm going to reference a lot of the articles that we looked at over the years to determine what we were doing and make sure that what we were doing was right to address fecal coliform. Again, this is another one of those studies that was conducted down in Beckley. Or I'm sorry, it was I guess the study was conducted out of the Greenbrier Valley, but it was out of the research lab there in Beckley. And this one was looking at how does fecal coliform move through the soil? What is that driver to transport it? And what they found was that it really depends on the type of soil that you have and how much water is available in that soil. Of course, the presence of livestock is also a must in this situation. One of the other things that they found with this study was that free-floating fecal coliform in water really is very short-lived, only has a half-life of about 1 day. So that goes back to, we've used this data to determine how we design our buffers. You want to make sure that you have a buffer with some good water holding capacity, something that very similar to like a green infrastructure type practice, something that will hold water for 24 hours before releasing it back into a waterway free of any kind of erosion, so that hopefully the bacteria that goes into the buffer is able to die off before it actually gets back into the waterway from there. Another study that was done out of the same lab. This one's also looking at transport the transport of fecal coliform and some other bacteria. And what it found was that fecal coliform was most present during peak storm flows, while other bacteria were actually present all the time during normal flows, high flows, low flows, those sort of things. So what they concluded from this was that fecal coliform, for it to be free floating in a stream, it pretty well needs to be attached to soil particles. And that's very important as what you'll see as we go through this. Controlling erosion is one of the key factors in controlling fecal coliform. In another study, again, kind of a continuation of the last one, they were looking at the efficiencies of soil in capturing fecal coliform. And of course, there's a lot of variables that go into this. This study was actually done utilizing sinkhole filters. What they do is they block off a sinkhole to where water can only go through one small point. And then they compared it with the pasture land practices, rotational grazing, nutrient management planning, those sort of things that were also going on that farm, and found that with the right combination of practices, you could actually see an 85 to a 90% reduction in fecal coliform coming off that farm, going through the sinkholes into the cave system and ultimately getting into the waterways. They also found that you could see the same reductions in things like pesticides and phosphorus as well. The next study, and this one didn't exactly turn out the way USDA wanted it to. The next study looked at the efficiency of conservation programs. And if you're a watershed group looking to develop some sort of cost share program or something, pay very close attention to this one, because what this study found was that in order to have it make a significant difference utilizing a program, no matter what practices you put on the ground, you needed to have a targeted approach rather than I guess what you would call a shotgun approach. So if you're familiar with the way USDA programs typically operate, anybody in the county can come in, sign up, and they get ranked, and the money is distributed amongst everybody that signs up. A few years ago, West Virginia tried a program where they were, targeting certain watersheds and things. I'm not sure if there's any of that still existing. I'm sure Sam can probably talk about that in his talk. But essentially, what this study showed was that the old way of doing things, where every farmer got a piece of the pie, really wasn't cutting it. They really were not making a significant impact. But when they started targeting these specific areas, then that is where you started seeing the impact as far as reducing fecal coliform in our streams. Now, a lot of farmers didn't think that was all that fair because, their neighbor down by the creek got a lot more money than they did from the government. But unfortunately, these are conservation programs, not subsidy programs, basically. So hopefully, as programs move on and evolve, they can kind of start to fit this model a little bit better. After that, some more of the research that was done looked at individual practices. And from this particular study, what they looked at was some traditional practices on dairies where they were installing things like very expensive waste management systems, and comparing that to grazing practices such as rotational grazing systems, alternative water systems, those sort of things. And what they found was that the results were very similar. The waste treatment facility, of course, you're seeing a 99% reduction in fecal coliform from that, because you're taking all that waste, putting it into one pit, and then utilizing that as fertilizer, down the road. In your grazing practices, what you're doing is actually more evenly distributing those nutrients and that manure over a field, where naturally a lot of that fecal coliform is going to be killed off through UV radiation from the sun. The nutrients are going to be absorbed a little more efficiently by the vegetation that's growing out there. And with that, like I said, you see a lot of very similar results for a lot less money. Um, then we get into a study that was we've used this one a lot, focusing on buffers. Now, this is not one that was done in West Virginia. I don't remember exactly where this study was conducted. Probably Missouri, because we looked at a lot of them from Missouri. Matter of fact, a lot of your really good grazing research is done through the University of Missouri. And what this looked at was the trapping efficiency of our buffers. And we use this a lot to help kind of design these buffers. What it found was that if you're just looking to address fecal coliform, you don't need a particularly wide buffer. Now, again, there's some different variables there. Your soil type, your slope, vegetation is a really big variable. But even a 1 to 3 meter buffer was more than efficient enough to capture 99% of the bacteria that might get into that system. The chart here is from the same study. If you look at that where it says your slope 5%, mixed grasses and trees. So when it's saying mixed grasses, it's basically referring to a native grassland type situation where you've got just a hodgepodge of different grasses. Most likely, if this was in West Virginia, it would be all cool season grasses. Probably in Missouri, there it would have been a mix of cool season and warm season grasses. But if you look at the efficiencies between mixed grass versus straight grass, so something that was actually planted and designed with trees in both situations, look how your efficiencies really go up there. And what that comes down to is they're actually designed those buffers with root systems and specific trees to prevent erosion and also start building soil structure. Again, you can see as you look down through that chart, the greater the slope, the wider that buffer needs to be to have the higher efficiencies, because you do get more runoff going straight through and kind of bypassing buffer. So, a few tips on how to design that buffer. Like I said, you want trees and shrubs, but you want small trees and shrubs. You want something with big roots that are going to be strong, not real hard, not real easy to come out, because those are going to hold in your soil a lot better and prevent erosion, prevent mass erosion is what those are going to do. Grasses, hey, anyone who's ever looked at an erosion sediment control plan, it always has a planting plan for grasses, and grasses are great at controlling sheet erosion, but not necessarily mass erosion. The mass erosion is where your trees and that root system comes in. The grasses, of course, like I said, they're going to help control any kind of sheet erosion going through that system. But also, you want deep-rooted grasses that are going to create soil structure. As grasses grow and are that biomass above the ground is removed, whether it be by mowing or grazing, those roots die off. So constantly, all season long, grass roots are growing and dying, growing and dying. And as they die off, that material that your roots are made out of, it deteriorates into the ground. It creates organic matter in the soil, which builds soil structure, which builds water holding capacity, which is very important in your buffers. Now, looking at that list right there, grasses, I'm sure someone in the chat is probably already giving me down the road for listing reed canary grass. Yes, that is an invasive species in a lot of cases, but in a lot of cases, that might be the only grass you have in that buffer. So I'm not advocating to plant reed canary grass, but if you have it there already, use it to your advantage. More than likely, if that is the grass that's there to begin with, you're probably not going to get anything else established. So utilize it to your advantage. It creates a great bulk that will help force water to infiltrate, creates a really great root system. Just manage it. Come in before it goes to seed and mow it off once a year, and it won't go to seed again. You won't have to worry about it spreading. Fescue is another really good deep rooted cool season grass to utilize in these situations. As warm seasons go, I really like using gamma grasses if you can get them established. Switchgrass is another great one, depending on the variety. You do have to watch real close for what variety of switchgrass you would plant. Because again, you want to have a buffer with a soil structure that's going to hold some water. So you want something that's going to have kind of wet feet. Looking at the root depths again on grasses, would you want Kentucky bluegrass in your buffer? Probably not. It's a great forage. You want that up in the pasture, but down in your buffer, it's not the most deep rooted. Probably not one that you're going to have a lot of success with. Your fescues, your orchard grass, those sort of things with much deeper roots from a cool season standpoint. And again, switchgrass. I mean, look at the depth there on switchgrass, 10 feet. That's a very good grass that can hold a lot of soil and also force a lot of water into the ground. When you are developing buffer and designing these, keep in mind you will have biomass growing at all times. So your cool season grasses, such as your orchard grass, your tall fescue, they're going to come on great in the spring, fall back off, and then come back again in the fall. Your warm season grasses are usually right there, June through early September, to kind of help fill that gap. Also, don't rule out your legumes, things like Ladina clover, red clover, bird's foot trefoil. They have a lot of warm season tendencies, and they're very good plants to have in your buffer. I would stay away from the alfalfa. Alfalfa there, actually pulled this chart out of a planting guide for pasture systems. That's why it has it on there. But alfalfa is actually a native plant to Iraq. It's a desert plant. We've just cultivated it into being a crop here in North America. But I would definitely stay away from that for buffer planting. Trees, again, like I said, you want your shrubby type trees, your alders, your willows, dogwoods, silky dogwoods, things like that are small and have big root systems. What this chart's showing you is the tensile strength to remove that tree from the ground. So if you look at an alder, which is really just a big shrub, compare it to a big silver maple, it's going to take twice as much energy to pull that alder out of the ground as it is that silver maple. Something like that's going to have a lot better capacity for holding soil and keeping it in place and keeping your buffer functioning. Lastly, what I'll show you here is it's a tool that was developed by the U.S. Forest Service. Anybody's ever seen this book right here? Hopefully, it doesn't kind of get found out by the background. There we go. These books are in most USDA service centers, or at least they used to be. But this is a tool that was, like I said, it was developed by the U.S. Forest Service, who's done a lot of the research on this, on buffers. But what it does, it allows you to walk through step by step how to design a buffer, what your trapping efficiencies would be based on your soil type, based on the pollutant that you're trying to address, your slope, your vegetation type, those sort of things. So like if you take line number 7 right there in that green square, what it's showing is with a 50% cover factor. So it says 0.5 right there. Again, that's 50% vegetation, which is really not all that great, but you're on only a 2% slope and you got to find sandy loam soil and you're just addressing sediment. You can get roughly 100% trapping efficiency at approximately a 15-foot buffer. Other sediments, or I'm sorry, other pollutants, different slopes, different soils, those sort of things, you can see where you would match it up to the different lines and you would have different trapping efficiencies. Some of them you're not even going to get up to 100% with. But now keep in mind when you're doing this, or if you're doing this, anything that you would match up to sediment is what you would use to address fecal coliform, because that fecal coliform is going to be attached to the sediment particles as they would go from your buffer into the stream, or from straight from a pasture field into the stream. That I'll get the references of the articles that I've cited here. So if you want to look any of those up, and I think Jenna will send you all a copy of this presentation. Anybody have any questions? Turn it back over to you, Martin. Did we lose Martin?
Sorry, muted. Muted and confused. All right, thank you, Dennis. The floor is open for questions. We have none in the Q&A box. Does anybody want to speak up?
Well, either I did really good explaining everything, or I've confused the heck out of everybody.
I think it was the former. John agrees. You did a great job. Great. We'll wait just a couple more moments in case anyone has any questions. Oh, Brian raised his hand. Okay. All right. Oh, where'd you go? Okay, Brian.
I'm having some technical difficulties. I didn't mean to raise my hand, but thank you though.
Okay, no problem. John also raised his hand.
It might be a bit too noisy for me to speak here. I'm in a server room. But I did want to mention, we've got about 12 years of monitoring of fecal coliform and E. coli out in Jefferson County. And we've noticed now for a number of years that the levels in the main stem of the Shenandoah spike after every rain. And of course, we're monitoring sediment, and that goes up too. So your explanation makes perfect sense to us. One thing that we've also noticed, though, is high levels in tributary streams also after a rain. And I'm starting to wonder, given your explanation and the sources that you've cited, if there could be E. coli contamination in an ongoing manner from older municipal sewage systems that just sort of sits in the soil layer, especially in the epicarst layer, and then when it rains, washes out into those tributary streams.
Yeah, that's one thing. We've seen that a lot in karst area of the Greenbrier Valley, particularly down at the Kitchen Creek sub watershed of Second Creek. There's an area there where 50 years ago, gentleman's waste treatment or waste storage facility for his dairy was a sinkhole, and everything was pushed out of the dairy parlor right into the sinkhole where never see it again. And it took years after we did all the work there to start seeing a reduction, because it just took that long to start flushing the system out. We also saw something like that on the Milligan Creek watershed, where you've got really a couple of watersheds kind of almost combined, overlapping there, just depending on what the storm surge is through the cave system. And but yeah, you will see that coming, especially out of your karst areas. But legacy bacteria is a real thing, and sometimes it can take a while. one of the I didn't reference it in this talk because I didn't talk to the guy beforehand. But I actually reached out to a friend of mine that I went to undergraduate school with years ago, who's a researcher at Johns Hopkins now as a microbiologist there. I think he's got 2 PhDs or something. One of these guys who's just smarter than any man alive, and was asking him one day about some of these things that we were seeing. And he told me that anytime you have a carbon source in that water, whether it's fallen trees, lots of leaves after the fall, that those sort of things. So the bacteria will attach to that and it'll feed on it and it'll reproduce. And as long as there's that food source, you could always have an issue. But especially if you have stocked up legacy bacteria there, it can take a long time before you start seeing the counts go down to levels that are within the state statute.
Kelly Flaherty found one of your guides online, and we're gonna put that in the chat.
Yeah, I believe that book is online. I think you can download a PDF from it.
Yes, and we can send that out with the resources too.
And actually, maybe while Sam's talking there, I'll go back through my files and see if I have that I can just post a PDF in there.
All right. Are there any other questions before we move on to hear from Sam? If you do, we're going to have another question and answer session after Sam's presentation, and Dennis will still be with us, I believe, so we can also address the questions.
I'll be right here.
All right. Well, our next presenter is Sam Irvin, and he is a conservation planner for Trout Unlimited's Potomac Headwater Home Rivers Initiative based in Franklin, West Virginia. He plans the private lands restoration work and helps with grant management and continues to survey brook trout patches in the Potomac headwaters. And today he's going to be talking to us about how to connect people, money, and fish. So I'll pass it to Sam.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenna. It's a great opportunity to be able to talk with some watershed groups and some other folks about this. This is something that I kind of worked with on when I was with the conservation agency before Trout Unlimited, and kind of became very familiar with fecal coliform when you're managing, some 319 money, and we'll get into that here in a little bit as well. But let me pull up my, oops. Can you guys still see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. But today I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Trout Unlimited and what we do in specifically in Potomac Valley, but also across the state and how it's unique to us. But also, talk a little bit about how this overlaps with the fecal coliform aspect of mitigation work. So we'll just jump right in. So Trout Unlimited here in West Virginia is a pretty unique scope compared to most of the rest of Trout Unlimited in the rest of the nation. We have a pretty broad, like top-down approach for like watershed scale projects and planning. We aim to kind of protect the headwaters and then work downstream from there, just kind of increasing the amount that we've restored, but also hopefully gaining a little more traction and support from from the community that we're in. And we're able to do this mostly through our wonderful and helpful partners, specifically with NRCS. In fact, I'm actually a joint employee with NRCS, so I get to do a little bit of both and kind of have access to their resources, but also do a lot of outreach for them in the area. But we have a lot of other partners, including the Farm Service Agency, the U.S. Forest Service, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the DEP, Nature Conservancy, other private entities, and obviously many others. And we mostly focus on the actual implementation of ag BMPs. In my position where I handle all the private lands work, we see a project all the way through from outreach, meeting with landowners, to actually having our own crew do the work, or sometimes we do contract it out. But for the most part, we we're able to do it all in-house and actually go through with the surveying, the reporting, and dealing with the landowner entirely. So from start to finish, we're able to see a project all the way through. And with our partnership specifically with NRCS and Farm Service Agency, we're able to leverage their funds and their cost share programs with our own grants or other private funds to really implement, stream restorations, obviously in Potomac Valley or Greenbrier watersheds, essentially for free for landowners. So EQIP is the program that NRCS uses. It's called the Environmental Quality Incentives Program that Dennis actually mentioned a little bit ago. And there are some special fund pools that Trout Unlimited actually kind of falls into, and there's a lot of them, and they're very unique to different areas and different watersheds sometimes, like Dennis kind of alluded to. But if you're interested in more of that, we can, you probably could talk with your local offices, and I'll actually have a slide for that as well. But EQIP pays a straight rate for all the practices that they have, which they have a very broad practice sheet, and different offices kind of focus on specific practices. Whereas FSA has the CREP program, which is the Conservation Reserve Enhancement Program, which pays up to 90% of just the stream exclusion practices. And being able to partner with those these entities, and then also using our own private grant funds, it really allows us to kind of stretch our funding to make a really broad and impact, in these priority areas. So, and speaking of priority areas, these are our, 4 main priority areas currently in the state. Each of these kind of have their own unique impacts that we, work to mitigate and then, restore the trout and cold water resources. A lot of times we're aiming to reconnect fragmented patches of habitat and fish through, like I said, the whole watershed scale approach. And we have seen huge downstream pollution impacts reduced through our work, but also through other projects. We are just one of many partners actively working to clean up a lot of these streams. And we focus our efforts in these areas, but that doesn't mean we don't work outside of these areas. Obviously, we have some upcoming tree plantings in the far eastern panhandle. We work heavily in in the Greenbrier and other areas and down south especially. So these are just happen to be kind of our publicized priority waters, but we have some discretion to kind of be able to work in some other areas. And a lot of these areas have different pollution issues. So you have a lot of ag-based issues in Greenbrier Valley, Potomac Valley, but down south you have a lot of natural resources extraction issues, or even in some cases you have larger manufacturing issues, inputs. So a lot of things that we have to take into consideration, but these are our main priority areas currently. And so this is a really interesting video, and an awesome video, I should say. And this is pretty much why we do what we do. This was actually on a recent stream exclusion job that we did. You can still see a lot of that extra sediment in there that this beautiful female brook trout is clearing out as she's getting ready to spawn. So they actually clear out this sediment because their eggs are non-adhesive eggs. So they have to fall down into cracks to be able to stay in place. Or at least that's one of the hypotheses. But this is, what the end product of lots of, many years of outreach and many years of doing some project implementation and surveying, and seeing it come to fruition is extremely satisfying. And this is where we really try to connect with landowners about the brook trout, because it is such a charismatic and beautiful species, and it can be something they really take a lot of pride in, being our state fish. Plus, it's an indicator species, so it's one of those species where if you see it, you probably have pretty clean water. So I might try to mute this. I forgot we were doing fence work in the background of this video. I don't think I can mute it. Maybe I can. There we go. Whew. That skid steer buzzing my ear. But we really try to emphasize that a farmer can have both a very successful operation and protect the water and brook trout populations. It's not a one or another situation, So So outreach strategies. This is probably the most important part of my job, but what I'd imagine is, most important part of most of your all's jobs is trying to get people on board with conservation. It's really important to know who you are trying to pitch conservation to. In my case, am I talking to a small scale farmer? Is it more of a large industrial farmer? Do they have a very hands-off management? Is it, very intense management? They're very hands-on. And a lot of times this is going to shape how you're going to approach them, but also, what practices are going to work in tandem with their current operation and with their management. So it's really important to kind of know who you're talking to, and maybe even do a little bit of background research, talking with locals. So the next thing is to try to become as knowledgeable on these topics as possible, or even try to bring in someone with a little bit more expertise in these fields. So this is where, having a webinar like this that West Virginia Rivers and the DEP are hosting is a great place to start, especially since, not everyone's going to be an expert in fecal coliform or in agriculture. So again, this is a great place to start. And honestly, many of these agricultural practices can be pretty complex, especially with how they interact with fecal coliform. Can vary based off the practice, like kind of what Dennis was getting into. So it's really important to kind of know, who you're talking to, but also what you really want to achieve and how these practices are designed, installed, and even most importantly, understanding how these practices are going to be maintained. Another really important thing is to use local resources. Like I said, talking to locals to kind of get an understanding of the audience you're going to be, reaching out to. Whoops. Sorry about that. So like I have down there on the bottom of the screen, I would first reach out to local conservation district offices. There on that QR code. They are going to be a great place to start. And when, especially for watershed groups, or just other entities, to kind of get a baseline knowledge of the area. They usually have a really good full understanding of the regions and specifically farmers who might be interested in these practices or projects. Plus, they usually also have, funds to help pay for ag practices. Each district's a little bit different in their budgets and what practices they focus on, but it's a good place to at least start, talk to folks, get some resources. Another one are your local USDA offices. There's usually one in every county. There are obviously exceptions, as always. And they have a ton of information on all their programs like EQIP and CREP. But they can also just be there to help give technical assistance to landowners or even to you as well to kind of help broaden your understanding on these topics. Another great resources are extension offices. Again, I think there's one in each county, or there should be. They usually have great resources for landowners, and they usually also have updated events calendar. If you wanted to kind of find upcoming events where you might be able to interact with some of these, targeted outreach folks for, future projects, it just gives you an opportunity to talk with them and kind of start to build that relationship with these folks. So what's worked? For Trout Unlimited in Potomac Valley specifically, what's worked a lot is actually focusing on getting a project completed in your priority area. Even if it might be a little small or maybe a little bit less significant, a lot of times this will lead to, neighbors or families or friends, becoming interested in these programs as well. And then you kind of get a little bit of like a snowball effect where, you kind of build momentum in a region or, in a, neighborhood or something. And you're really, don't underestimate the power of a little bit of jealousy in some of these farmers. If they see new fencing and new troughs and crossings and new, fruit trees or whatever trees they get to plant, sometimes the neighbor looks at that and is like, that actually doesn't sound too bad. And so a lot of times that's a great way to start. And then, honestly, a lot of regular door-to-door visits or phone calls can be pretty effective. And that's, again, how we've been able to build up a pretty good basis for our projects here in Potomac Valley. This is definitely a point where you need to know your audience and know who you're going to talk to, like reaching out to local resources first, just to see how receptive these new landowners are going to be to you showing up at their house or just dropping, a quick phone call to them. But like I said, this is honestly how we've been able to get a lot of our projects completed in these areas. Local events or dinners are also a great place to start. Again, like I mentioned with extension services, they have right now, actually, they're doing extension dinners all throughout the state of West Virginia. A lot of times there's like specific speakers that you can kind of see who's going to be talking at, and then you can kind of start from there to meet folks at these dinners, and maybe start to kind of build a little bit of a relationship and, start from there. And then last thing is persistency can sometimes pay off. It can be, we've talked to folks who've just shut the door in our face, and then told us to leave. But a lot of times if you see them again at the store, or you see them, at another dinner, you just kind of keep asking, maybe you've changed your mind, or maybe, you need some new fencing now because something's happened, something might have changed. I don't recommend being pushy, but I think checking up on them, making sure that, it might be a project they're interested in, and I say this as a way that you really are trying to build more of a relationship with these landowners, especially agricultural farmers. You definitely do not want to start off on the wrong foot. So like I say, you need to be cautious, know your audience, know the folks you're reaching out to. And also, even if, they have areas that you can tell are, causing some sediment erosion issues or pollution, probably don't point the finger at them and say you're the problem, because that would probably almost certainly backfire for most of the farmers that I know of. It's really best to start off and kind of say, you have a really great operation. How can we enhance it? How can we make your operation last for a long time? What hasn't worked? Mailers seem to be the biggest waste of money. A lot of watershed groups I know will spend a lot of money doing mailers, and I know we did mailers when I was with the conservation agency, and for about a week it seems like you get a lot of response, and then those mailers end up just becoming really great tinder for their wood stove. So, and a lot of times you get a broad audience of folks who may not be projects you're interested in, or they're just maybe interested in what you're talking about, and they actually don't have any opportunity to work with them. So like I said, it seems to be better to reach out to landowners directly and kind of start building that relationship. Other ads, like in social media or newspapers, have also been kind of mixed results for us. Sometimes, like I said, I'm sure I could probably figure out a few projects that have started from those, but for the most part, all of our projects have come from meeting people, person to person, face to face, and actually just talking about what we can offer them and how our project scope fits with them. And it just seems to be more important to actually kind of, like I said, build that relationship with them, especially in a trusting manner, and then kind of work towards a project. It can be very time consuming, but at the same time, that effort can really garner some respect from farmers too, and then they can down the line maybe listen to these benefits of these projects. So specific BMPs that Trout Unlimited utilize are stream exclusion fencing, alternate watering systems, tree establishment, stream bank protections, channel bed stabilization, stream habitat enhancement, and aquatic organism passage. These are our main practices that we use on private lands. These are practices that NRCS uses, and we're able to fund through NRCS or FSA. And you can even sometimes fund some of these practices from your local conservation districts. Again, you need to just reach out and kind of talk with somebody to get that started. I do have the bottom two asterisk because I'm not going to actually kind of talk to those too much today, mostly because they don't really, matter as much for fecal coliform reductions, which that's what this webinar is about. The other ones, even stream bank protections and channel bed stabilization, you focus on soil erosion, stream bank erosion. So those will, like Dennis had kind of pointed to, when you're having soil get in the stream, you're almost certainly also getting fecal coliform in the stream as well. So some of the other agricultural BMPs that can also help reduce fecal coliform are nutrient management plans, the manure litter facilities, covered feeding lots, cover crops, prescribed grazing plans, and obviously certainly more. I have a little note there at the bottom that these are probably not these are definitely not things that Trout Unlimited are involved with. I have some knowledge on them. I could not plan these projects, we partner with NRCS and we point people to NRCS or local conservation districts for that. But again, I don't, like I said, the little note at the bottom, I don't know if these are necessarily suited for watershed groups to really be approaching farmers about. It's great to let them know about them, but really maybe point them to a district office or USDA office to really kind of get the ball rolling. And you can even show them where it's at, maybe give them some of the outreach, papers that NRCS has. But with alternate watering systems, it's definitely the most important thing to focus on when you're, dealing with a farmer in agriculture. Cattle, become very routine type animals, and they go back to the same watering hole over and over and over again. So as soon as you fence off the stream, they need to have a good, stable water source. And so it's better to actually do that first, give them that alternate water system. That way, when you fence them off out of the stream, they already have a secure water source ready. Some of the types that we've installed are concrete troughs, tire troughs, or Ritchie troughs. And here recently, we've been really focusing on these tire troughs like you see in the picture there. They just tend to be pretty reliable. When they freeze up, you can just smack the side of them with a sledgehammer, and farmers, tend to be happy about them. And a lot of times we're connecting these to, water sources like a developed spring. So they're just kind of a flow through system. So they, have an inlet pipe and then an outflow pipe that then flows back to the spring or back to the stream away from the cattle. And then obviously we have the gravel pad that goes around the troughs to kind of, mitigate any more soil erosion from, having a 1,200-pound animal standing there drinking water. So, and both of these, CREP and EQIP, can pay for this, as well as, districts can help pay for, these types of practices. And again, TU pays the difference on these when they're doing a project with us. Stream exclusion fencing, it's mainly just CREP or EQIP that Trout Unlimited uses. Again, there's, the district has money for that usually. CREP, however, requires a 35-foot buffer on both sides, whereas EQIP technically doesn't have a minimum, although we usually aim for that 12 to 15-foot buffer to get at least one row of trees planted between the fence and the bank. CREP is a 10 or 15-year contract that pays the landowner a, like rental fee per acre for each year. And that's why it can be pretty enticing sometimes. And there's a lot of times where we look at an area and say, oh, cattle probably weren't even using that section of the, property anyway. So might as well do CREP, and get a little bit of that rental payment. So Trout Unlimited usually uses high tensile electric fence unless otherwise needed. Like if you have smaller livestock like goats or sheep, we'll use woven wire or barbed wire fencing to keep them from being able to slide under, right into the buffer. So, and these are again with treated posts, and some of the other practices that are included with this would be like a hard armored stream crossing. So that way, when you have to move equipment or move cattle or something to the other side, you still have a really secure stream bank and really stable area that doesn't lead to too much soil erosion. Tree establishment. This is where we partner heavily with the West Virginia Division of Forestry here in Potomac Valley. They give us the technical assistance, but also help us with selecting the appropriate species that are going to thrive in this, little microclimate and, soils that are there. Both EQIP and CREP can again pay for this. This also is a good place to where landowner can have a lot of say and really, have a lot of essentially input into the project and, kind of feel a little bit like it's their own. A lot of times we right off the bat say like, do you want to see more wildlife? We can plant maybe some swamp white oak trees or common apple trees. Sometimes people actually hate deer, and so they want us to just plant the whole thing in willows and sycamores. So it just depends. We have to install all these protections as well. That is a plastic Tubex tube. The white oak stakes, typically we have to use some sort of mat. We've been leaning towards mats, but we have used mulch in the past, and then bird nets over the tops of these tubes. A lot of times, or with CREP, you have to have a survive, certain percentage survival rate for of 75%, and they usually check when that 2 or 3 year mark and come out and with the Division of Forestry to verify that as well. I believe CREP also has a canopy cover requirement if the riparian area is already mostly forested, which I believe it's also 75% canopy cover. There's also some site prep involved here. We have to usually hand scalp the top layer of the soil off just to kind of keep the weeds at bay. We've had pretty good success doing this, although I've also seen times where invasives are just, they're invasive. They're going to get into your buffer. The fun stuff, stream bank and channel bed protections. We use our in-house stream engineers for site visits, reports, and for our designs. These are practices that are only available through EQIP and not through the CREP program. A lot of times our in-house stream engineers are also joint employees with NRCS because we kind of have a special partnership where, within certain areas, Trout Unlimited just handles all of the stream reports and designs. The main difference between stream bank stabilization and channel bed protections is that stream bank stabilization will be the in-stream structure like a vein or a J-hook, which I believe this is a vein in the picture there. But then it has to have adjacent bank protections, like root wads or even riprap, depending on like the velocity. So this looks like it would probably be just a channel bed protection because it looks like a structure by itself. But like up here in this bend, if let's say there was a structure up here and then there was, root wads placed through here to protect this bend, this would be considered stream bank protection. So even though they're essentially the same practice, it depends on what the practice is achieving. So channel bed stabilization, protects this from head cutting back and also will deepen the thalweg, which is, the deepest part of the channel. And it actually increases water holding capacity, which, can mitigate a lot of high water events. The other thing on here is bioengineering, which is a kind of a broader term. It includes regrading, which is, boulders, another top soil, and then we use a coconut husk mats, and then we do what's called live staking through those. Live stakings are just essentially cuttings of like willows or elderberries, serviceberries, to kind of, take off quickly and, anchor that regraded area, in a very fast manner. We can also do some conservation covers through here, which is essentially just reseeding practices. And a lot of times we try to aim for those native riparian species, which can be hard to find. But those usually have really deep roots and, hold the bank together very well, kind of like what Dennis mentioned earlier. And there's other design aspects that we can do, but it just kind of depends on the situation. These are kind of our main ones that we use. There's certain ones that can actually even like narrow the channel. They're kind of like squared on either side, and it forces the water towards, to kind of rechannelize. But a lot of times that's if you have a very long stretch that's all very thin and you need to kind of force it back to the middle. All right, what I consider the most important part of all this, and maybe what a lot of watershed groups are probably interested in, is how we're able to make it happen and what kind of funds and money that we look at. At least that's what Martin kind of mentioned, that he'd like to hear about Trout Unlimited and how we manage things like that. So again, we partner heavily with NRCS and FSA for their program. So NRCS will pay a straight rate, and if it comes out to like 60% of the funding, then we use our own private funds to cover the other 40%. And that can come from private donations. Obviously, we have Trout Unlimited memberships and private donors that just supply Trout Unlimited. But mostly here in the Potomac Valley, we use NIFWIF funds, which is the National Fish and Wildlife Federation, Chesapeake Bay funds, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program, and then we've even occasionally used 319 of the Clean Water Act, like I mentioned in the past. These are not the total list of everything that all the money that we use, but it's definitely kind of our main ones that we use. There's a ton of other places to look for money. I know if you're maybe, the Wild Turkey Federation, Ducks Unlimited probably does some wetland work. So there's a lot of other places you could look for money. These are just kind of what Trout Unlimited here in West Virginia, are able to use. It's really important to kind of emphasize that you want to connect your funders with these projects. This is where a lot of times we use what's called like a surrogate project, where we have a landowner who's very interested in these works, and then but we don't have the money quite yet. Then we'll use that project. We'll go through the planning process, maybe even start a design, and we'll use that to kind of sway funders to support it, because they are actually able to see, the project and how it's going to actually, where their money is going to be directly spent. And a lot of times that's a great way to even ask for a little bit more money, because say, this is a big surrogate project, but here's 3 other ones that we'd like to do, most funders are not only interested in, how it's going to benefit the ecosystem or water quality and reduce fecal coliform, but also how the community are going to be engaged through these projects. So it's really important to kind of, be able to show that you're not only doing really great things for the ecosystem, but also how you're going to connect with maybe the community, or maybe even specific, community groups that, might actually be disadvantaged, I guess is the way to put it. Because there are certain pools of money that like NIFWIF or Chesapeake Bay has that are specific for, equity and diversity and injustice. So, and it's also really important to connect landowners with this funding source. This is one that I think a lot of people overlook. They just say, hey, we have money, let's do this work. We're doing it for free. But a lot of times landowners are very interested in who's actually interested in doing this work. Is it, is it the Partners Program? Are they interested in an endangered species? Is it a Clean Water Act thing, or is it NIFWIF, or is it people from DC? And really kind of connecting them that say, you have a lot of people invested in this area, and TU's invested in this area heavily. It's important to kind of connect those dots for folks. That way they kind of see the whole grand scheme, see the whole watershed approach, and see, be able to connect the dots with where those funding sources are coming from that actually go to their project. And then match is arguably probably the most important aspect of, grant management. And sometimes I've even found that it gets a little overlooked, because it'll be what trips you up down the line when you're, trying to do grant reporting. Most of our funding sources require some match. Many times it's around 50% of the total project cost. This is where I believe watershed groups are actually usually extremely equipped to be able to like engage volunteers, and that'll really help, accumulate those match hours. I think the current volunteer rate is like $29 an hour, and that's ridiculously high, but it's also ridiculously good. You get 40 people who work, 16 hours over 2 days. That's a lot of match that can, be put towards, other areas. Things like doing some of our surveying, our tree plantings, our reseeding practices, and even some of our minor maintenance work, would be really fitting for volunteer engagement and to really jack up those match hours, and for watershed groups as well. Other things to keep in mind if you're doing grant management work is, and for match specifically, is to look at the landowner. A lot of times we use materials on the property, and we put a dollar value to that as well. Whether that we're using, old cedars that a farmer wanted out of their field anyway, or boulders they wanted out of their field anyway. The landowner might not care, but we'll actually say, hey, we think these boulders are worth X amount, because of what the market usually says it is. A lot of times the landowner will also help plant trees even occasionally, or help maintain it. And a lot of, we can count that towards our match, and even equipment hours. That's a great place to get a lot of money quick if a landowner is helping you on their own equipment. So those are things to really keep in mind with working with farmers. A lot of times they do want to help, or sometimes they're very hands off. But if they are helping, really try to capture that match. All right, some success stories. So pretty much in every aspect and every stream that we've worked in, we have seen, significant increases in brook trout numbers pretty much across the board and consistently. This is I believe Reed Spring was a stream restoration we did back in 2016. And I think it's in Berkeley County. I believe, yeah, I think it's outside of Martinsburg. And this is pre-data and post fish numbers, total brook trout collected actually for the Reed Spring project, and then a very similar chart down here on a stream in Pendleton County called Jackthorne. And we completed this project in 2017. So you can kind of see, I think we did a survey in 2015, but didn't find any. And then you can see significant increases in numbers. And these are not only, not only increase in numbers of fish, but also bigger age diversities as well. And this is actually really apparent in places that we do a blockage removal or an AOP project, aquatic organism passage, because a lot of times bigger fish can make it through, taller drops, taller, perched culverts. But smaller fish can't. So as soon as you remove that culvert and put in a better structure, you'll start to see a better age diversities as well, up and down a section of stream. And this really honestly truly supports the notion that if you build it, they will come. We pretty much at every project where we've known there was a brook trout population there, but it's been hindered. If you build the habitat, they are going to come and inhabit that area. Sometimes we've seen projects where, there was good reproductive areas, like good spawning material, but then so we see a lot of young of the years or smaller fish in the summertime, but then a lot of the adults don't have a good place to stay. So as soon as we add some of that diversity of habitat, we get to see pretty extreme changes. This is another example here on the left where this one's a little bit more of an actual, these are Excel graphs. These are actual, statistics that we ran through R. These are pre and post restoration. I don't know if you guys can see that for lengths with confidence intervals of before restoration of 241 millimeters and max length afterward of 270 with fairly strong confidence intervals. They do overlap, but I can't remember exactly where this one was at. That's the only thing. I had it, when I put it in, I remember, but I can't remember off the top of my head right now. But you can see this was pre-restoration, post-restoration, same story, significant increases across the board. And these are the same graphs, graphs from the same project site, where these are actually standardized for time or effort. Again, you can still see noticeable increases in brook trout numbers. So essentially, when I say standardized for time or effort, it's called a CPUE, catch per unit of effort. And it's essentially just to kind of standardize that, like, hey, we weren't just like really trying to find the fish here. We, spent about the same amount of time or same amount of effort surveying pre and post, restoration work. So, and essentially these are all electrofishing surveys like you see in this picture here, where we, put them out on a board, measure in millimeters. We even have a scale, I think you can see in the background here. And we've seen very significant brook trout sizes, since we've done this. We've even seen some, improvements in the benthic macroinvertebrates, which we've done some, I believe it is just Save Our Stream studies, if I'm not mistaken. That I do not do those yet. I mean, I've been out and done those, but I don't do Trout Unlimited right now. But I don't believe we have any data on it right now, but just from some, qualitative aspect, we've seen increases in, what we call the big three for water quality, which are your mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies. So that's really good, obviously, to connect the food source with the habitat. That's, crossing them all off and being able to cross our T's, I guess, and dot our I's. But these are great. Some of the better pictures I've found for pre and post construction photos. And this is, what really matters to most landowners here. We had, extreme stream bank erosion here on both sides. These are two different landowners. And, this is, what they're going to see at the end. They see a stabilized stream bank. They see recovering riparian area, and they, have new infrastructure, new fencing, new watering systems. And, these are, what sways the landowner. And these kind of success stories are where you can, do one of these in an area and then really start to pick up some snowball, momentum into future projects. So this one really here, just the mature riparian area. And a lot of, and through these types of practices, and obviously, many other practices by other agencies, the South Branch of the Potomac has actually seen a significant decrease in fecal coliform, like CFUs, pretty much at every one of their sampling sites over the last 25 years. A lot of that is due to, the grazing practices, the, litter control. Obviously, we have a lot of poultry houses in Potomac Valley. But, a lot of that can be attributed to our exclusion practices, our stream bank controls, riparian tree plantings. And we like to think that it's been a really great partnership here in the Potomac Valley and in Greenbrier and other areas to be able to make this happen. And here's all my contact information if you'd like to reach out and talk about this some more, or if you even have some land or know a landowner who might be interested in doing a project, feel free to reach out. We're always looking for more, and we always are interested in doing plenty of work with folks. So thanks, guys.
Oh, thank you so much, Sam. That's super informative. Does anyone have any questions? We'll open up the floor now for questions. And again, you can either type them in the Q&A or you can click the raise hand button and we'll unmute you and you can ask your question aloud. I have a question, actually.
Yeah.
So kind of the success indicators that you showed were number of brook trout, and then it seemed to also correlate with like the, community dynamics. So like the age differences and things like that. And then you said macroinvertebrate surveys as well. Have you guys measured fecal coliform at all, or do you mainly just use the fish and the macroinvertebrate as the indicators for success?
Yeah, so we never measure, we've done some minor water chemistry tests, but we never have tested for fecal coliform before, although a lot of our obviously partnering agencies in this area have done that type of work. Like the West Virginia Department of Agriculture in Moorfield has their whole water sampling lab, and they go around the state, and specifically in Potomac Valley, doing their water sampling for most of our 319 projects or other things like that. So.
Right. Well, if there are no more questions for Sam, you can note his contact information here, and we'll also send out the slides after, so you can contact him at any time. And yeah, with that, we will conclude the webinar. Thanks everyone for attending this week. Our next session of this webinar series is going to be next Thursday. That's February 29th at 2:30. And we'll be hearing from Rick Purchase, who's with the Health and Human Resources. He is the Health and Human Resources Program Manager for the Bureau of Public Health. And he'll be talking about what to do when you can't put in a septic leach field. And then we'll also hear from Barry Milam, who was the former manager of Crab Orchard MacArthur Public Service District in Western Raleigh County. And he will be talking about perspectives on non-point source bacteria pollution from a PSD manager. And Martin is going to put the link to the registration link in the chat. If you're already registered, that's great. If you aren't, then we encourage you to register, and maybe you want to forward the registration link to some friends of yours who you think might also benefit from attending the next week's webinars. And then I'll just put two more plugs in here. One is for the West Virginia Watershed Network's newsletter. It's called WaterNet. It goes out quarterly, and it includes resources and opportunities for watershed groups, as well as sometimes highlight successful watershed group projects. And some of those opportunities are related to fecal coliform. So Martin just put the link in the chat to sign up for that newsletter. And then lastly, if there's any other topics that you would like us to host for, let us know. Martin will also pop my email in the chat, and you can email us at any time, and we can try to put together a training for that particular topic. So with that being said, I'll just say one final thanks to all of our presenters today. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Dennis. And thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you next week.